The Congress of South African Trade Unions is gearing up for a fight as several companies are implementing mandatory vaccinations. Earlier this week, the CCMA confirmed that it received 30 complaints relating to mandatory vaccinations. Just last week, President Cyril Ramaphosa announced that government will be looking into mandatory vaccinations. The South African Human Rights Commission is currently investigating these complaints from workers. Joining me now to discuss the legal issues that may arise, we are joined by the Chairperson of the South African Human Rights Commission, Advocate Bongani Majola. Advocate Majola, very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us on Newzroom Afrika. Some concerns as unions like Cosatu are inundated with calls from workers saying that they stand to lose their jobs. I mean, as you observe and perhaps take stock of some of these conversations that are taking place, what do you have to say as the Human Rights Commission?
Well, thank you for the opportunity. The issue is not a simple one. It is complex in many respects, and I think that all of us have to try to be calm in approaching it and not be too emotional about it. Employers should also not rush into decisions that are not all right. However, the South African Human Rights Commission was created to protect and promote rights, and it was created to promote all rights, all rights. So sometimes the rights of some people or some individuals may have to be limited in the interest of protecting the rights of others. Even before COVID-19, it was accepted in a democratic society that when you go to employment, the environment where you are employed has to be safe. In other words, should not be harmful to your health. The Constitution also came with Section 24 that says everyone is entitled to such an environment. But it does not negate the fact that I, as an individual, have got the right to my bodily integrity, my right to religion, my right to many other things. And so it's a matter of balancing those rights. And so we need then to ask the question, how do we go about when I refuse to be vaccinated just because I'm exercising my right, not because I'm going to get sick, not because anything, but because I just want to push my right. But then I also want to go to places where I am likely to infect other people and cause them to be sick and even get hospitalized or die. In other words, we need then to balance whether their rights are worth less than your rights. As a person who feels that you just do not want to be, And it's accepted that this pandemic is not caused by anyone else, and that it's an existential problem, and that all of us have to sacrifice something. So my view is that we should respect and protect and promote the right to personal integrity, but not at the expense of the rights of personal integrity of other people. We have got to try and strike a balance that protects all rights. And the Constitution does allow a limited amount of limitation in order to achieve that balance.
Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa has already spoken about, exploring the possibility of making vaccinations mandatory, assigning a group of individuals to look into that matter. And it really just speaks to what will happen going forward, charting a way forward. We've seen how some universities have also dropped policies speaking about the academic year for 2022 and mandatory vaccinations. And we know that the private sector has also implemented some policies speaking to vaccine mandate policies based on guidelines set out by the Department of Labor. It really is a tricky situation. How do you imagine the probabilities? Well, how will it work out here? Because on one end, it's safeguarding lives, and on the other end, it's recognizing somebody's human rights.
Well, I've kind of answered part of your question, but with regard to universities, we have had complaints from universities in the Western Cape, and we've started an investigation with that. We've engaged with some of them, and most of them appear to be still considering the issue of whether or not they are going to impose mandatory vaccination of some form by refusing admission. But at this stage, nothing has been finalized at those universities. One told us that they are actually just still discussing the matter. The other said that they have drafted something, but they will send it out for circulation, for discussion before they finalize. So we would like to just see what comes out of that. With regard to employers, as I said earlier on, the employers have been given the obligation to make sure that the places of employment are safe. Section 8.1 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. It's been here for a very long time, and nobody has ever said that they have a problem with it. So what the regulations do, what the consolidated direction that the Minister of Labour passed, actually just adds to that by saying that the employer then should identify those that are vulnerable, to this virus, and in order that they should be vaccinated and so on. So there are questions about whether or not that consolidated regulation is valid, but for the courts then to pronounce on it. We in the Commission took it that it is a law of general application, and that it could be justifiable in a democratic society. I still would like just to say that we should not look at this matter as a matter of an individual right. The rights of the individual may not override the rights of other individuals, whether it's a larger group and so on. In other words, I cannot exercise my individual rights to the detriment of your rights. If we do that, if we take that approach, we then have to come to a situation where we balance what is reasonable and acceptable and justifiable in a democratic society. So what President Ramaphosa, I think, is trying to do is to find whether there is a way of making that balance. I do not know whether he will eventually legislate mandatory legislation. If he does, we will have to look at it and scrutinize it in terms of Section 36 of the Constitution. And if it doesn't meet the dictates of Section 36, we will then call it out as being unconstitutional.
As you and I speak, Advocate Majola, cases are piling up at the CCMA with some workers complaining about being forced into vaccinating. And at the same time, I understand that you are investigating some of these complaints. What will form the scope of your investigations when it comes to coming to some sort of, positive outcome?
Well, the Constitution is very clear. It says that the South African Human Rights Commission should be guided by the Constitution and the law, nothing else. So, as a starting point, we will look at the Constitution and the law. And the Constitution says every right can be limited. That's the first point. Number two, how should the right be limited? Section 36 then kicks in. So we will then look at whether there is a law of general application that authorizes or that enables or allows an employer to compel people. If there isn't such a law, then of course the employer may not do that. But what I know is that the consolidated direction is very strict. It sets a lot of conditions for an employer to come to a decision that somebody needs to be vaccinated. We've had cases ourselves where an employer kind of jumped the gun and said to a person, unless you're vaccinated, you're going to be chucked out. And when they came to us and we explained to the employer was grateful and improved the order that he had given. So our approach would then be to look at each case on its merits, because there are people who, because of health reasons, may not take vaccination, and that the employer should be aware of that. There are people who may not take vaccination on religious grounds. That has to be weighed and balanced against the rights of other people, so that in protecting your rights, we do not endanger the rights of other people. There has to be a balance. If we go to court, the court will exactly do the same thing. Try to strike a balance between your rights as an individual and the rights of other people, the rights of a group of unions against the rights of the general public, or against the rights of other workers in a particular case. So that's how we're going to do. We've already approached the universities, for example, because we wanted to know on the basis of what law they are proposing to order mandatory vaccination. So, and as I said, we are still discussing that matter with them.
As your discussions take place, Cosatu is gearing up for a fight at several workplaces implementing mandatory vaccines. I know you've called for calm. You're urging employees to act slowly instead of going about and moving at a speedily pace. But, what word of advice would you give to Cosatu as they go out in efforts to protect their members?
Well, I think that Cosatu as a union has the obligation to protect their members. And, the Constitution says that everybody is entitled to have their disputes resolved in a court of law. And if they go to the court of law, my sense is that we should not really fear. We should have confidence that if they are right in what they are saying, the courts are going to then lay down the law and explain the Constitution, and that will then have guidance as to which way we're going to go. But until that happens, it remains a question, and we have looked at this question as a commission, and our view is that with regard to employment, that there are two laws of general application, which is 8.1 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, as well as the consolidated regulation. And as I said, that some people say that that consolidated regulation may be unconstitutional. As the Commission, we didn't get to that point, but if it goes to court, maybe then the court would also clarify that.
Mm-hmm. Very well. Thank you so much for your time and weighing in on that discussion. Chairperson of the South African Human Rights Commission, Advocate Majola. They're giving us some sort of clarity as Cosatu is gearing up for a fight, as several workplaces are now implementing mandatory vaccinations. And, of course, those concerns and complaints piling up at the CCMA with several workers being dismissed for refusing to vaccinate.